This is VOCM Open Line. Call 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626. The views and opinions of this program are not necessarily those of this station. The biggest conversation in Newfoundland and Labrador starts now. Here's VOCM Open Line host Paddy Daly.
Well, all right, and good morning to you. Thank you very much for tuning into the program. It's Tuesday, March the 26th. This is Open Line. I'm your host, Paddy Daly. Fance King is sitting in the producer's chair again this morning. You'll be speaking with Fance when you pick up the phone to give us a shout in the queue on the air. If you're in the St. John's metro region, the number to dial, 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, it's toll-free long distance, 1-888-590-VOCM. That's 8626. All right, so over the past weekend down at the Mary Brown Centre, the Growlers dropped 2 of 3 at the hands of the Maine Mariners. But interestingly regarding the Mary Brown Centre, now that we know the courts have told the City of St. John's and St. John's Sports and Entertainment they have to release the details about the shenanigans, the goings-on, and the eventual financial settlement with Deacon Sports, the owner of the Growlers. Looking forward to that. As we fast-track through the end of the regular season in the National Hockey League, prepping for the finals or the playoffs, people trying to pick their favourites going in. Interesting note, 1917, the Stanley Cup final at the Seattle Ice Arena, the Seattle Metropolitans beat the Montreal Canadiens 9-1 for a 3-1 series victory. It was the first U.S. team to win the Stanley Cup. It's been since 1993 since a Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup, which, of course, was the Montreal Canadiens. Lots of concerns about Canadian hockey fans regarding some of the tax implications when you want to get into it. We can do it. And maybe you're watching some March Madness, college basketball. Pretty exciting stuff. One of the greatest rivalries kicked off in the 41st NCAA Men's Basketball Championships in 1979. Michigan State beats Indiana State 75-64, marks the start of the rivalry between future Hall of Famers Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. At the time, it was the highest-rated game in the history of televised college basketball. Maybe you're watching the Jays and loving a bit of baseball. Here's a good one. Joe DiMaggio, in his second year in the major leagues, took advice from Ty Cobb, one of the all-time greats, and started using a heavier 40-ounce bat. Raised his slugging percentage about 100 points, preceded his famous 56-game hitting streak. That record still stands today, and that was on this date in 1937. That's one of those records that may never be broken, even though, they're all supposed to be made to be broken. Okay. So there's going to be a press conference this morning at the NLTA at 10:30. And President Trent Langdon will be addressing the media, talking about an access to information request that was satisfied, looking at the issue of violence in schools. You know, sometimes I think there's just a bit of eye-rolling associated. Maybe we're just a bit complacent on some of these issues. Maybe you see the headlines written like that so often that it's just we're sort of maybe numb to them. But there's got to be a variety of factors leading into the incidents of violence, which apparently are pretty prevalent. Every time I speak about it on this show, inevitably I'll get an email from a family talking about the issue of violence regarding their child. So I'm curious to hear what Mr. Langdon is going to deliver this morning. He will be joining us on this program around 11 o'clock, we think. So you look at some of the contributing factors here. So, for starters, the NLTA, pretty disappointed in the most recent budget, sort of ho-hum, and we'll get to a variety of different groups, because this year's budget was really quite strange. Not only because of the one-day delay, but all of the briefings that would have been entertained by the media, members of business groups, organized labor, and the like, it didn't happen. So many people are still trying to sift through the budget to figure out what's in their period. Okay, and in education. So when we look at the issues regarding the decline in math, science, and reading score, that probably is somewhat impacted by the levels of violence. Then you look at chronic absenteeism in the province of schools, and you know full well violence may indeed play an active role in some of those staggering numbers. Some of the problems, this always feels kind of mean-spirited when we talk about it like this, or I talk about it like this, but the inclusive model is probably not helping on that front either. Then add to it the lack of discipline. And again, I'm not, harking back to the days where you got called down to Brother Murphy's office and out came the razor strap. But there's a distinct lack of discipline. And some of that, I would suggest, probably starts at home. But even inside the schools, teachers and administrators are really hamstrung here. They can't enforce some deadlines for submitting your paperwork or your book report or your assignment. And so consequently, when it feels like there's a bit of a carefree, do-as-you-please environment, that has the possibility to bring forward some incidents of violence. Then add to it some of the mental health supports that might not be in place. And the current child youth advocate is talking about exactly that and reaching out to the general public for feedback on that issue. So I'll be curious to hear from Mr. Langdon here a little bit later in the show this morning, because I bet you it's going to be pretty eye-opening stuff what we find out on that really difficult front. All right, sticking with education for a second, the folks at Memorial University Students' Union not pleased with the budget either. Now, I don't think there's anything surprising. I suppose what they're doing is just highlighting the ongoing concern that reared its head back in 2021 when there was the tuition freeze was lifted. It was in place for 22 years. It has come with a significant increase in cost for domestic students. Just think about it for a second. Before the tuition freeze was lifted, tuition was $2,550 a year for a first full course load, amongst the lowest in the country. Now, domestic undergraduates, $6,240. So obviously, with the reduction of almost $68.4 million over the course of 5 years, that tuition hike is meaningful. Now, you might not have someone who's personally attending university that's a friend of yours or a family member, but this has wide-ranging implications. It really does. So the domestic enrollment is down. And you would have to think that that's because of the tuition hike. Now, it's still comparable to many universities across Atlantic Canada and the bulk of Canada, but that sticker shock is absolutely massive. And our successes as a province will remain in the hands of K-12 and post-secondary as we move on down the line. Okay, let's keep going. Another group not necessarily impressed with the budget either, the Registered Nurses Union. So nothing really new in the budget regarding the nurses in the province, and we do know that we continually throw around the two R's, right? The recruitment and the retention. Yvette Coffey, the president of the Registered Nurses Union, constantly says the key is retention. You know, of course, actively recruiting is a good thing, and Minister Cody's talking about the successes they've had on that front. Even though we just get the numbers that have been recruited, we don't include the numbers that have left for our actual net gain number. But inside this particular issue for the nurses, you know they've been disgruntled. And you know that there's all these talks about work-life balance and working shoulder to shoulder with travel nurses. But even when you look at their most recent collective bargaining, they had things that were negotiated, set in stone, and one was a premium that was negotiated on behalf of the nurses, especially the senior nurses. 15 years of service would pay nurses an extra 1% on top of their annual salary. Nurses with 20 years of service would receive an additional 2%. Nurses receiving another 2% at 25 years. But here's the problem. They were told they'd be paid this particular negotiated premium by March 31st. And then, lo and behold, they receive a notice saying that's not going to happen. Now, some of the comments coming from the health authority is talking about the difficulty in trying to analyze all the databases to see who qualifies for these types of raises. But this was settled back in August. So when we know we have a frustrated group of linchpin healthcare professionals that are registered nurses, and they're not alone as the cornerstones or the linchpins, but this doesn't help. This doesn't help at all. It's not incumbent on the nurses to prove who's deserved of this premium. It's on the Health Authority and Treasury Board and the Department of Finance. I mean, with the horsepower and the numbers of people working for the province, and knowing this was a negotiated settlement, beginning in August, get down to the hard work, the tedious work, the boring work. It's too bad government isn't a bit more boring as opposed to the want for politicians in particular to make it more flamboyant and glamorous, because it's not. It's about the hard work. So nurses who are already frustrated, add this to the pile. So something that was negotiated has not come through. Unbelievable stuff. Anyway, you want to take it on. You know what to do. The NLMA. Incoming president is Dr. Stephen Major. We've had him on the show a few times. Pretty outspoken. Look forward to speaking with Dr. Major again. You know, talking about the fact, I've used the word complacent already this morning, and Dr. Major fears that that's where we might be with the ongoing concerns inside of healthcare. And he's probably not wrong. Look, we hear lots of concerns voiced on this program. I get lots of emails about people's personal struggles with access to health care and mental health care and treatment for addictions. And so in this budget, he says, you know, even though it's some $4 billion, about 40% of the overall budget being spent on health care, he doesn't see where the immediacy of the needs are being addressed. So $30 million to hire healthcare workers for 19 of these family care teams, Bayvert, Springdale, Lewisport, Portugal Coast and Phillips, downtown St. John's. Another couple of $1 million for Memorial University's med school, seats for locals. Add to it, you know, the disappointment we're hearing for people, particularly that are in the nursing schools, that they're not being offered full-time permanent positions, but yet we know that there's so many vacancies. So it's hard to understand exactly how and why this happens. So once again, I mentioned Minister Siobhan Cody talking about recruitment efforts. So 450 nurses and 80 physicians. Again, we don't know how many have left, so where the net gains are for real, we don't know. So anyway, to talk about another $15 million for expanded mental health initiatives, $900,000 for harm reduction team, $1 million to create mobile crisis response teams in rural communities. But even the NLMA, even inside of $4 billion. And yes, there's got to be more money for recruitment and retention. And yes, we have to move to a more digitized world for access to your medical files, which of course has long been a problem. And then when you solve one problem by moving away from the MS-DOS system and all the paper that we use for medical records, we still have to hope that with all of these things being captured online and digitized, that they keep them as safe as humanly possible and are actively upgrading protections all the time, as opposed to what happened that led to the Meditech cyber attack. Okay, quick one. All right, healthcare transfer dollars. It's all about the money. All about the money. Okay, yesterday, announcement between Federal Health Minister Mark Holland and Premier Fury out at the West Coast, the Western Regional Memorial Hospital, which still doesn't have radiation oncologists hired, so consequently, all those radiation clinics may not be usable when it's scheduled to open in June. So here's the transfer dollar numbers. Just let me set it up. Sometimes it feels like we're being told something that's good and monies that are flowing, but it comes across with an air of, we owe you some sort of thanks. Right? It's our money to begin with. And Canadian healthcare transfer dollars are sacrosanct. And look, thanks for making the announcement, but I just don't feel the need to get on bended knee to say anything beyond good. Thanks, and here are the numbers. So over the course of 24-25, the transfer dollars will round up to about $1.1 billion. Inside the Canada Health Transfer and Canada Social Transfer payments for this fiscal year, $688 million and $223 million respectively. Then add in equalization, and that total is $218 million for 24-25. So the federal government, this fiscal year, about $52 billion in transfers to the provinces and territories. That's an increase of about 5.5% from 23-24. So over the course of 10 years, there's going to be an escalator inside this. So $749 million, I think, is the number over 10 years. But then they get just to the broad strokes again. To address unique health system needs, expanding access to services, supporting healthcare workers, reducing backlogs, including mental health and substance use support, improved licensing, credential recognition, modernizing health systems, all good. But to go back to what Dr. Stephen Major is saying, is if it's a matter of complacency amongst the general public, or do any of these pots of money, can they come? Look, there's no such thing as flipping a switch and everything's good. No such thing as a blink of an eye, everything's hunky-dory. But it'd be nice to know, and some descriptions about, for instance, wait times and surgical backlogs. Now, there's a full complement of cardiac surgeons now in place in St. John's Health Sciences Centre, but the wait list still remains around 200. And we've been sending patients to Ottawa, and Ottawa surgeons have made their way to this province, performed dozens of surgeries. But can someone please just articulate to me, timelines for when we think we're going to have a benchmark of a wait list of 200 to 100, and other disciplines that are big strains in the system for other specialties and diagnostic procedures and what have you, because people are waiting extraordinary long times. Even add in the conversation we had with Minister Osborne regarding an MRI machine, possibly for Corner Brook, and the amount of time people are waiting for their MRI and what has been health outcomes. Headaches are now all of a sudden tumors. And you've seen the stories and read them just like I have. If you want to take it on, we can do it. Let's move into the water. Still trying to fully wrap my mind around what was achieved by the protesters. They are calling it a victory. And fair enough, it's their industry. They're the ones with the boots on the deck. And so they know 100% more about it than I do. And we do focus on crab. I will add to it this morning, based on a couple of emails I got from lobster harvesters. They want their industry to be recognized as well as being problematic and not managed the way they think it should be. The email that I read was fairly complex, so I'm still trying to understand the ins and the outs. But let's just add the concept of outside buyers. Competition may indeed lead to better price. It just might. And we had the Association for Seafood Producers, Jeff Loader, the executive director, on the program yesterday, talk about the fact that inside the collective agreement, there is the need for the processors to pay EI, workers' comp. They do not pay CPP contributions. We got that figured out by the end of the show yesterday. And then they talk about some of the different moving parts. For instance, a processor giving harvesters ice, what they call free. And, of course, they're not going to pay EI and workers' comp and or give free ice to harvesters who are sending their product elsewhere, being sold to an outside buyer. But let's be realistic. Inside of any price, when the ASP comes up with their price to submit to the price panel, which is still in limbo, we don't even know what the price for crab will be this year. And I know it's not the only species. Lobsters are the second most valuable species being landed. No price. When the ASP comes forward with a price, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, but they factor in all the operational costs. So it might not be cash changing hands when ice is provided, but they factor in the price of everything they do, including ice. So not so sure that's going to be the biggest kind of deal, because if I'm an outside buyer, I can get ice, I suppose, right? So places that are making ice. And then, on top of it, it's going to be interesting to see it all in writing, a legal document. And as a result of that not being in place at this moment in time, they've asked for the season to be delayed a week. We'll see how the Minister federally responds. Another issue on the desk of the Federal Fisheries Minister, Diane Leboutier, is the petition that was circulating regarding extensions to the recreational food fishery. We've had many conversations on this program about it. Clifford Small, the Conservative member, tabled it on the 22nd of March, so once again it's in the hands of the Minister. And we'll see what becomes of it. And like everything else regarding the fisheries, we won't find out until the 11th hour, as they say. So those two things have been addressed. Okay. A couple of more quick federal ones before we move on. So you've heard me talk about the members of Parliament and their forecasted pay raise coming on the 1st of April, and we absolutely could and should talk about that. Some 75% of Canadians are opposed to this scheduled pay raise, and they don't need to take it. After the 08-09 recession, there was 3 years straight where the members of Parliament did not get their annual raise, and this year, based on historical measures, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 4.2, 4.3%. People aren't happy about that, nor should they be. But here's another one. You know, people will insist that politicians run maybe with good intentions at the beginning, and then they adopt the party stripe, and then they become just simply members of a party as opposed to representatives of the constituents who elected them. And then there's the thought, well, they're just hanging on to get their pension. You know, for some members, I'm sure that's probably true. Doesn't mean that every politician is a lazy lout who simply wants to get paid top dollar and get an annual raise and get a pension. But the pension conversation is important. There does need to be a revamp or revisit of politicians' pensions, you know, on the federal front. 6 years of service. If the member was elected in 2019, not eligible for their pension until the 21st of October of 2025. The federal election on paper today would be October the 20th of 2025. Then there's legislation that's been introduced to push the election 1 week to the 27th of October of 2025. The meaning? 80 additional members of Parliament will be eligible to collect the pension. The additional pension totals, $120 million. Annual pensions for members of Parliament range from $32,000 to $49,000. So, and you hear people talk about this and say, if politicians don't want to be looked at as being shady, then stop doing shady things. Because this is the epitome of shady. Like, if you win next year, then fair enough. And you get your pension, fair enough. That's, you know what you're getting yourself into. We as voters know what the pension plan looks like. But imagine, for the sake of moving the election 1 week to accommodate pretty lucrative pensions after 6 years of service, it doesn't feel right. It just doesn't. It's very much akin to the scheduled pay raise. So I don't know if you want to take that on, but we can do it if you're so inclined. And, you know, people talk about not only to reform pension plans, talk about ending severance, excellent idea, and the whole transition allowance. So there's a lot there regarding rate of pay. Now, I don't begrudge politicians getting paid. That's not the point. The point is the country, for the most part, is struggling. You don't need a pay raise. For the most part, the country is struggling, and the whole gig economy and people working all these side hustles, talking about the fact that a pension, what pension? for the vast majority of Canadians, it's not like back in your father's or grandfather's day. You went to work for the phone company, put in your 30 years, and had a big pension. It's just not that way at all. So maybe they can take the temperature of the country and do the right thing. We're on Twitter. We're VOCM Open Line. Follow us there. Email address is openline@vocm.com. When we come back, let's have a great show. That means you're in the queue to talk about whatever's on your mind. Don't go away.
This is Open Line on the VOCM Big Land FM radio network.
Welcome back to the program. Let's go this morning, begin on line number 2. Eliza, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Good morning to you.
How are you this morning?
I'm very well, thanks. How about yourself?
I'm pretty good. I just want to talk about a public meeting that is going to be held in Bonavista this Wednesday. It's hosted by Tipa Vista Wellness Foundation's Mental Health and Addictions Awareness Committee, and it has to do with diagnosis of children and young adults who are diagnosed with various developmental, mental, or physical challenges. And we're encouraging parents and or caregivers to come along and share their concerns or their ideas of what we can do to assist those children to have programs and activities outside of the school. Like a lot of children who are in school with various challenges, when they get out of school, there's nothing available to them, and it must be very difficult, especially on the families who have children, and it's very sad. Like, it's so sad to see children who are whatever the challenge is. So we want to talk to the parents and the caregivers to see what ideas they may have that Tipa Vista can help them with for after-school programs and activities.
It's confusing and troubling, isn't it? I mean, even think back to the report written by the Citizens Representative Bradley Moss, talking about the confusion about resources, the financial problems or financial devastation. There's stress associated with it. And yes, I mean, we're talking about supports that are required, but people don't really know how to get them. His report was pretty good. It's called By a Thread, I'm pretty sure, By a Thread, and there's some 12 recommendations therein. But when you read the individual family stories and the lack of supports outside, for instance, the walls of the school, it's a huge problem. And he's talking about the vision over the next 10 years for these families. Just amazing. You know, then there's the cost of respite care, maybe some $35,000 a year. One social worker told a lady, well, get divorced so you can qualify for social services. What? I mean, we're not looking for marital concerns to be addressed. We're looking for family concerns to be addressed and supports to be put in place. Not being told that you should get divorced so you can get welfare. That's not an answer.
No, I think a lot of the answers are simpler than what we make them out to be, because they want a basic program, something. They may have joy at home, but let's give them a little bit more joy. Let's provide some simple activities, and we're not asking for the world. And I think too that sometimes we depend on government a bit too much. We got to start doing things. If there's a need unmet in an area and you got a group of parents or an organization that can assist in any way, then let's put something together. Let's put something together to make lives better. Let's do better. But that's not saying we do not need assistance.
No, but I love that. That is, in my personal opinion, the way we need to think about a variety of issues societally. It's not all a full reliance on government, because I say this and sometimes people get quite cross, but government's not here to save your life, right? But between community advocates and people who can pick up the torch or be local champions and work together, then we can achieve a lot of stuff. I mean, just look at some things like the Shorefast Foundation and the groups on the Bonavista Peninsula where you are that join forces as volunteers and people who are like-minded, and they get things done. It doesn't always mean that your member of the House of Assembly or your member of Parliament is going to be able to do it, because we are more nimble as people. We can get it done now. And yes, we might need some support financially speaking or what have you. But I love that theme and that thought, Eliza, because we can achieve a lot more if we really put our mind to it, as opposed to blaming everything on the government. They deserve blame for all kinds of stuff, but we can do more.
We can do more. We can all do more.
Sure.
And I think together, I'm not leaving government out of this because I just want to go a little further now to talk about the Wellness Center in Bonavista. It is said that it's going to be the first of its kind in the province, and it's a unique venture. And I believe, without a doubt, that the people on the Bonavista Peninsula can make that center a unique center, not as to a building in itself, but unique for the people who need it the most. Like we have to provide activities and programs for those who need it the most. And sometimes when we feel like we don't need it, we don't go forward to get in somebody else's shoes who really do need it. And I can't imagine the heartache, the devastation, and the stress that families go through. They just want more, a little more for their children. And we just got to do it. Well, don't laugh at me. We will do it.
I have no doubt.
Anyway, thanks for the time on the air. I appreciate it very much. And I do want to say one more thing. I'm realizing more and more the importance of open line. I just got amazed especially over the last few days, for some reason, like it just struck me, Patty, that we're not just venting for something to do. People get on open line because they're concerned, they're hurt, they don't know where to turn. And they turn to open line because their voice is shared right across the province, well, more than the province. And people with like-minded concerns, then they get on. And you're pretty well versed, in whatever people talk about. I don't know how you do it, but I'm just going to say to you, keep it up and help the people of Newfoundland with their voices.
I appreciate it, Eliza. And, from where I sit, some callers or people might be hesitant to call and not sure if they have a certain grasp on one issue or another, but they've got some ideas. Look, we never know where the next good idea is going to come from.
Exactly.
We never know when the next call is going to be put forward, and all of a sudden we've got like-minded people on the Bonavista Peninsula making a positive difference. So if that can be as a result of someone getting on this show, fantastic. And it doesn't matter. Like I repeat this all the time. If you're listening this morning and you've got an issue of concern, and it might feel very, very local, if it's a big enough concern for you to be dwelling on it, it's a big enough concern to talk about it on the show. I mean, when we, because it might feel like an issue that's simply in Lassie, but it might be the same issue in communities in the surrounding area. And consequently, we can kill a bunch of birds with the exact same stone phone call. And so let's try it. So, Liza, give the folks the details about where, when for the meeting.
Okay, it's this Wednesday night at the Dr. Hilda Tremlett Wellness Center in Bonavista, and it's in the community kitchen. It's 7:15. And we're encouraging as many people to come out as possible and they don't have to speak. Some people are afraid to go to some meetings. Like they might feel like they got to talk, but they don't have to. They can just sit and be a part of something that we want to make bigger. So we got to start somewhere. So Wednesday night, 7:15, in Bonavista at the Wellness Center.
Sounds like it's probably going to be a good start or a good place to start. I appreciate the time, Eliza. Keep us in the loop.
Okay, I will. Thanks, Patty.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
All right, let's take a break. Before we get there, so yesterday on the program, the independent member for Humber Bay of Islands is Eddie Joyce. He called about comments made by Minister Jerry Byrne regarding low-income units to be built on the West Coast. Needing the demolished units in Dunfield Park. But the concern voiced by Mr. Joyce is where the folks in the Bay of Islands, the units are apparently going to be sold to help fund this. He's talking about NLHC homes. So the worry is, are people going to get evicted to accommodate the funding of the demolishing and the rebuild of low-income units in Dunfield Park? I don't know. But Jerry Byrne's the person who said it. He joins us right after this. Don't go away.
This is Open Line on the VOCM Bigland FM Radio Network.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number one. Say good morning to the Liberal member for Corner Brook. He's the Minister of Immigration and Skills. That's Jerry Byrne on one. Minister Byrne, you're on the air.
Thanks so very much, Patty, for having me on this morning.
Before we get into the topic that you're calling about regarding comments from Eddie Joyce yesterday, I mentioned off the top of the show, talked about scheduled pay raises and members of Parliament pension reform. Of course, and you're a past member of Parliament. Do you think it's high time that we have some review and reform of the pension plans and severance and transition allowances and the like? Because it seems fairly lavish for an already well-paid position.
Well, it's mostly statutory. It's by law that reform or that review has to occur. I know that in the provincial system, we've had that after every election, and in the provincial system, I remember in 2015 there was members of cabinet actually took a pay cut at that point in time, lowered from their standard. There has not been a pay raise since. So, I think your questions, your comments are not untimely in the least. It's part of the national conversation, the provincial conversation. How do we compensate? How do we pay for those who represent us? Is it in line? Is it consistent with the values of we hold? So that's supposed to be built into every review after every election campaign. It's what happens here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So I cannot see how that would not be timely at this point in time.
For me, it's very much akin to, promised democratic reform regarding first past the post. The government very quickly figured out that it was in their best interest to keep it the way it is as opposed to some sort of hybrid proportional representation or something or other, so they didn't change it. Same thing with rate of pay. Do you think that there should be a pay raise for members of the House of Assembly and or members of Parliament on April the 1st? Traditionally, it's about resemblant of what happened in the private sector, so that looks like about 4.2, 4.3%. I don't think they should take it this year, reading the temperature and understanding the struggles of Canadians. What do you think?
Listen, there's going to be a review, and there has not been a pay raise. I don't think pay increase. If memory serves me correctly, for members of the provincial legislature since about 2007, I think. Now, I stand to be corrected on that. I have to admit to you that my preoccupation is with my district and the people that I represent, so I really, unfortunately, I don't pay probably as good attention to that as I probably should, but I do know that for at least the last decade, if not longer, there's been no raise to MHA salaries, and I think that's consistent with what the values of the province are.
What would your message be to our 6 members of Parliament on that front? Because I know we're not talking about hundreds of millions of dollars and all the rest of it, but when you think and you talk about the cost of living and inflation and renewing my mortgage and the price of groceries, would your message to your colleagues up along and the 6 members from this province would be to put the brakes on this annual pay raise?
You know what? I really don't have a message to them. I recognize, they recognize that the pay scale for members of Parliament have really, really escalated, especially in the last 5 years, 6 years. There's a formula in place to be able to do that. Patty, this is a matter of conscience of legislatures in Ottawa who go to Ottawa on a regular basis. Now is a good time within the context of a review to reflect on what the values of society are, what the values of the constituents are, and to act accordingly. So, rather than me pronounce an expectation on them as a fellow legislator in a legislature that has not had a pay raise in many, many years, and consistent with what has been the expectation of our constituents. They should just do the right thing, and the right thing is their conscience.
Yeah, it's one thing to hear about axe the tax and spike the hike and all the rest of it, and all mum's the word on other issues regarding their own benefits. But anyway, I guess that's nature of the beast. Let's move on to the housing issue. So you talk about bringing low-income housing to your district. Talk about the need to demolish the units in Dunfield Park, then other homes be sold in the Bay of Islands. The concern coming from Eddie Joyce, and the question was, are people going to get evicted to sell these homes?
No, absolutely not. Patty, I've represented the people of the Bay of Islands for 20 years. I know so many people who currently live in social housing and low-income housing, and they're my friends. They were my constituents for 20 years. So some of the concerns that the MHA for Humber Bay of Islands expressed yesterday, there has not been one call to my office saying, Jerry, what are you at by? So I'm not really sure where this is coming from, except for the fact that there are three things that I feel we are on common mind about, that we agree about. So rather than talk about the divisions or where we disagree, here's where we agree. Corner Brook, and the member for Humber Bay of Islands has really said this himself, it's the district of Corner Brook where new social housing really, really needs to be made or created. It's where wraparound supports can be made, where services, whether they be healthcare, mental health and addictions, support in job transition. It's Corner Brook where those offices are, and that's where those wraparound supports are. So the member for Humber Bay of Islands and I both agree that it's Corner Brook where we really need to focus on new social housing developments. The member for Humber Bay of Islands also agree, and I also agree, that we've got units that need to be rationalized. We've got 32 units in the Crestview Place area, formerly, what many of us call Dunfield Park, that need to be reconstructed. They need to be demolished and torn down. We had 8 units that were destroyed by fire. But even further than that, we have units on the West Coast that we have not had anybody living in for many, many, many years, because the houses are not adequate. They're designed in such a way that they're not sensible or suitable for those who would want to live there. Some of them are actually 4-bedroom units, which of course doesn't mesh with what many families are today. So there are units in Cox's Cove, for example, that have not been occupied since 2018. There are units in McIvers, for which there are no demand for. So I think we all agree that if you've got a rental unit, a housing unit that has not been occupied, the door hasn't been opened since 2018, and not likely to be opened anytime soon, that it would be a good idea to put that on the open market and to use those proceeds. And that's really what this is all about, Patty.
So are any homes that are currently occupied going to be put up for sale?
Zero. That would be foolish. I mean, that's just, if they're occupied, they're needed. Why would anyone ever do that? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I'd like to dispel that kind of, and like I say, Patty, I don't know where exactly that came from. It makes sense to dispose of units that have not been occupied for 6 and 7 years. In the Crestview Place area, there are units there that have not been occupied since 2007. Just almost 20 years. So obviously, those issues need to be dealt with. But I haven't received one call from one of my former constituents who I represented for 20 years on this issue, so I don't know where this confusion is really coming from. Well, I was pretty clear about all of this.
Eddie said that it came from some constituents, so I suppose doing what he should be doing as the representative, putting it out there, looking for clarification, and I'm glad we got it this morning. I appreciate the time, Minister.
My pleasure, and if the member for Humber Bay of Islands wants any further clarification, if I can give him an update on some housing issues in the area, I'm more than available. I appreciate it.
Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. All right, let's keep rolling here. So there's the clarification. If you're one of those folks worried that you're living in one of those units, it's not going to be sold out from under you. That's the good news. Let's go to line 3. Jack, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty, and how are you this morning?
I'm well, Jack. How about yourself?
Well, I'm very good, but and I'll say that, but I'm bedridden to a certain degree, so... But there's a nice morning, and that makes it all the better to take the problems I got,
Fair enough. I'm glad you feel that way.
Patty, I wanted to call you this morning about the Women's World Curling this past week.
Yes, sir.
They flew up on Sunday, right?
Yep.
I was watching. I never missed curling. I love it. I don't play it, of course, but I always watch it. And I felt very proud when the Hogan team all came on individually, cheering Gusho on, now coming up this weekend in the men's worlds. And it felt very good to hear him congratulate him and wish him well. I never heard one congratulations from the men saying thank you for the girls and wish, and proud that they won. And then on your station Monday morning, I was listening to the radio, and they were all talking about different sports events and talking about our two boys in the NHL, which I'm very proud of, especially Noah, where he's playing with the Canadians, because that's my team. But nothing congratulating, not one time did your station, the people speak, congratulate the women on winning the Women's World Curling Championship.
I did.
And I thought that was kind of, I don't know, rude in my opinion. And I mean, I wish Gushu and his crew all the best, and I'll watch every game like I did with the women's, and I'll turn them on. But you know, they could talk about all other kind of sports and this and that and other, you know, but not once did they say congratulations to the Hogan team for winning the Women's Worlds.
Yeah, all I can... Okay, I can only speak for myself, Jack, but I most certainly did yesterday. I made a point of it because I watched a lot of curling last week, and including the final. Yeah. So I went right through and mentioned the fact that between the Scotties and the Worlds, Team Homan went 24-1. Rachel Homan was the all-star skip. Emma Miskew was the all-star second. So I made sure to put it out there because I thought it was fantastic.
Well, then I apologize to you.
Oh, don't worry about me.
No, I apologize to you because I personally didn't hear it. Maybe I dozed off for a second.
Yeah, fair enough.
That could happen to me here in the bed, but I want to congratulate the Hogan team winning the World, and let's get behind Gusher now, and hopefully he can bring home the men's Worlds.
Yeah, if he finishes in the top six, which he likely will, he'll get automatic Olympic berth qualifier, or qualifying berth.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that Rachel Homan might be the very best female curler in the world. I mean, she's incredible.
No argument for me. It's unreal. I've heard of people talking about curling as, you know, no-issue game and all this whole stuff. But, you know, when a woman can get on, or a man can get there and they can talk and say, no, I'm going to throw this and I'm going to put your rock there, and the rock goes there. That's not luck. That's precision. And I enjoyed the women's, and I'm sure I'm going to enjoy the men's.
Yeah, and it was great having it in Cape Breton, too, because the time zone made it easy to watch, too, right?
Yes, they certainly did. I don't know what's going to happen now. We're going from Sweden. I don't know for the men's, but I'm going to watch what I can tell you. And congratulations to both teams.
Absolutely. I'm with you 100%, Jack. I appreciate the time. Stay in touch.
Thank you, Paddy. Bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, congratulations to Homan, and go get him, Gushu. And, of course, we sometimes just say Team Gushu, but, of course, we've got Jeff Walker, E.J. Herndon, Mark Nichols, and Brad Gushu as the skipper. Let's take a break. When we come back, Alfred wants to reply to what he heard from Jeff Loader from the Association of Seafood Producers yesterday. Don't go away.
This is Open Line on the VOCM Big Land FM radio network.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go. Line number 2. Alfred, you're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy. How are you?
Not too bad at all. How about you?
Oh, not too bad. It's been a rough couple of weeks. Well, it's been a rough few years, really, I suppose, with the fishery, but it seems like there's always something. But I was going to send you an email with a few comments about what Jeff Loader said, but I figured it's better to try to call in and have me say. Some of it as a harvester is hard to swallow. Jeff was saying about the processing capacity of on the island. Like, you know, we did he say that we got too much capacity? Like, we got enough capacity to handle what crab is here? Is that the words he said?
I think that's a fair summary.
Henny, like, we left millions of pounds of crab in the water last year because the plants couldn't handle it. We were on trip limits because the plants couldn't handle it. The plants themselves dumped, and this is the God's honest truth, the plants dumped hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds of crab over the wharves and in landfills because it rotted on the wharves. They didn't have the capacity to process it. So how can, and that's a fact, how can the man say that we got enough capacity? I know small boats, small inshore boats, people that invested money buying licenses to keep in this industry, buying boats, that left 30,000 pounds of crab in the water because the plants couldn't process it.
Now, is that
as
much to do with the fact that the season was so compressed? I mean, the first 6 weeks the boats were tied up, so does that have an implication about what you just said?
No, Paddy, because the season was extended on the other end to let people fish longer. If we could have been, if harvesters were allowed to fish as we normally fished, that 30,000 pounds, that was only probably 3 or 4 trips of crab. But when you're only allowed to bring in 2,500 pounds of crab or 3,000 pounds of crab, when you're used to bringing, say, even in small boats, 6, 7, 8,000, because there's no processing capacity there. I don't know where Jeff Loader's coming from. The crab was out there on the bottom, dumped over from the barges and everything from the plants, buried up in landfills. So where's the capacity? I don't understand it.
Alfred, was the season extended 2 weeks? That's the number that popped into my mind. Is that accurate?
Some areas, I think, got more than 2 weeks. But if we weren't on the trip limits, we wouldn't even need the extension because most people are finished within a month and a half. The problem was the plants couldn't handle the crab. Geez, I don't understand it. My God, someone, I don't know who is writing the notes for the man, to speak on the radio. Well, my God, someone got to verify what's being said. I've seen it myself. I'm not telling lies. I just want all this straightened up. It's the truth. It was dumped bargeful after bargeful, carried out and dumped. Tractor trailer loads of crab, tucked everywhere in every little pit and every little place they could park a trailer load of crab because they couldn't get the footage of the plants. They never had the capacity. I made a few notes there. I'm talking about plant workers. We're worried about the plant workers. God love the plant workers. I got family that works in the plants. I don't want to see one of them. But where was Jeff Loader when Royal Greenland and all the other... Well, Jeff Loader wasn't there then. But where was the government? When Royal Greenland came in here, started buying up all the plants, and Ocean Choice and every other company, buying up all the plants in rural Newfoundland, moving that quota to their big super plants. Did those plant workers out in... I believe there was one up in Black Duck Cove.
Yeah, I think that's true.
But there was a few. What did you do for those workers? Make work project. Then you're on your own. The provincial government wasn't worried about the plant workers then. What about those poor people? But all of a sudden now that they've gone too far, and they're using the plant workers as an excuse. There's not going to be crab. For what crab is going to leave this island will be nothing. But why have that restriction there? Make them play on an open market, the same as every other business.
Just what did you just say there, Alfred? You figure there's not going to be any or not very much crab leave the province?
I don't think there's going to be a lot of crab leave the province, Paddy. I honestly don't. Okay. If someone comes and wants to buy a tractor trailer load, sure, let them buy it. If we got a company in Newfoundland that's making rubber gloves, do we look at them and say, boy, you cannot sell those gloves to someone in Nova Scotia? You can't sell it to someone in China. I know that's going to reverse because everything comes from China now, but I'm just saying, we don't put those restrictions on any other business. But we are. We are restricted. We're not asking for 1 red cent from the provincial government. Nothing. We just want to be treated as any other business.
Well, I guess now that's the case, though, right? Are you comforted with the deal that's been struck?
I was in there for the protests, and I tell you, it did you good to see all harvesters united, and they're supporting each other. And if we can get it on paper, what the minister and the premier said was going to be on paper, yes, I think it opens so many doors. So, it'll level the playing field. I tell you, in my opinion, Paddy, what happened was the companies, and I'll blame a lot of it on Royal Greenland because it was never so bad as this before until they come in here, which we can thank the minister for. They got too greedy. They wanted to buy up the whole industry. They wanted to buy every license. The comment was made, they wanted 200 licenses in 3PS in 2 years. Boy, they're pretty close. There's a fish company buying up licenses. That's not supposed to happen. processing capacity. Put it all in one super plant. No one's a big rural Newfoundland. But if we can do this and we can get these caps raised, these processing caps, there'll be more of these little mom and pop. I won't say mom and pop. Well, you know what I mean. Smaller operations start up. The one out in Bay Roberts or Carbonear. The one down in St. Mary's. Maybe one out on the West Coast. Maybe they'll be able to start up, employ some people in our communities. But with the way the government has allowed this industry to go, it was only a matter of time until something happened, Paddy. You can only poke people and put people down so long. And if I was the companies that are involved in ASP, I'd be looking around now and say, look, we did this ourselves. We just got too greedy. Let's start building a relationship back with the fishermen and women. Sorry, I'm getting a little...
That's okay. Now, so I don't know what's going to happen either with the concept of outside buyers. I know people are thinking that those restrictions should have never been in place in the first place. And I mean, I've said that I don't know how many times. It's one of the few industries I can think of where you're only allowed to sell to people you're told you're allowed to sell to, as opposed to sell it wherever you like. Wherever you can get the top dollar, sell it there, which we'll see whether or not that actually comes to pass. And look, I mean, Mr. Loader yesterday said if something like 20% of the crab left the province, of course that would have an impact on plant workers, and that just stands to reason. The province did say that they're willing to look at processing licenses and maybe an expansion there. Some sort of review is going to happen. So I guess it all remains to be seen. Remember, the minister responsible simply rubber-stamped a recommendation coming from the licensing panel regarding Royal Lands taking over Quincy. So, yes, it's ultimately up to the minister, but that was also recommended by the licensing panel. And when we spoke with the late Reg Anstey, who was at the time the chair of that panel, about their thoughts, they did say in their written submission that it's time for the minister and the government to do a careful review of foreign ownership inside the processing sector. I don't know if anyone's done anything on that, but that was the deal that really put foreign ownership on the front burner when we look at the plants.
Yeah, and Paddy, it's... Well, I lost my train of thought that time. It's just so frustrating, Paddy. Like, you would never go down. I was speaking to a friend of mine. He owns a gas station here. To put it to the public, how would he feel if he was sitting in the gas station, someone from Ontario pulled up to his pumps, wanted to buy gas, or down as a tourist, but he had to go out and say, I can't sell you gas. You're not from Newfoundland. I can't sell you gas. You're from Ontario. Well, that's the way we are. If a company wants to come and buy lobsters off of me, if he wants to buy crab, if he wants to buy codfish, look what happened last year with the lobster fishery. The company said, "Well, we're not paying the market price. We don't want to pay that." And they held us up. That cost us thousands of dollars, and the government just sat by.
Yeah, I know, and I've spoken to lobster harvesters in the last couple of days, but I suppose the commitment is outside buyers for every species. So we'll see what that document looks like now when they put pen to paper and, get it notarized or have the lawyers agree on either side about how this is going to look. Alfred, I'm glad you made time for the show. We're off to the news. I'll give you the final word.
Thanks for that, Paddy. The way I sum it up, you can only poke the bear so long. And the companies poked us and kept us down and got people enraged. It's people's houses. It's people's livelihoods. It's people's families that are at stake in this. All this stress is coming home to our families. We don't need to be at this. We just want to go to work the same as everyone else. But we don't want someone standing over us and keeping us down for greed. And that's all it was on the company's greed. They got too greedy. They wanted it all. But now it's not going to happen. And that protest last week, if this doesn't come true the way that it was promised, that'll be nothing. That'll be a garden party compared to the next one. And I don't mean threatening. I just mean people are that frustrated, Paddy, and I am too.
I appreciate the time, Alfred. Let's see what that document looks like later this week.
Will do. Thanks, Paddy, for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Take care.
Okay.
Bye. Bye-bye. All right, let's take a break for the news.
Is Open Line on the VOCM Big Land FM radio network.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 1. Maggie, you're on the air.
Hi, Patty. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks. How about you?
I'm pretty good, thank you. I called in because I wanted to talk a little bit about the protest last week, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I'm beating a dead horse, which is maybe not the right pun to use in this situation, but I will say I was there on Wednesday and Friday. My husband is a fish harvester, and so is my brother. I've got lots of friends and family in the industry. So I was there to show my support. It was very much largely a peaceful protest. It was intended to be a disruptive protest. There have been weeks, months where fishermen have been protesting to try and bring attention to this issue, and we really weren't getting any support. So, you kind of had to change tactics. And I think most people were accepting of that and understood it. There were some who were very, very upset with us, and that's understandable. Everybody has their own things going on, and we were trying very hard to handle that as best we could. Obviously, not everything went really well. I mean, there was certainly a video of one individual trying to get into the building, and there were fishermen yelling at her. A lot of people were really concerned about a big man yelling at a little woman. I will say, I think there's no place for intimidation regardless of gender. She handled herself really well. She walked away. Good for her. I do think government knew that we were going to be there protesting. They knew that people were really upset. They knew enough to have the RNC there, to have the horses there. They didn't let their people know that they probably shouldn't come into the building, which I kind of would question whether or not that was a good choice on their behalf. I think they probably need to improve their messaging when they're dealing with protests. And I'm not trying to shift blame. Obviously, we were there. We were the ones that caused, any disruption. But government also didn't really handle it very well, which I thought was really interesting. So a lot of confusion when people were trying to come in. A lot of people who were like, why are you even here? They had no concept that this was happening or had no idea about it. So we did a lot of chatting with people, apologizing for disrupting their day, but letting them know that we wouldn't be letting them into the building. We had lots of great conversations with a lot of the RNC officers that were there. I mean, we weren't, there was nobody throwing rocks or anything of the like, offering bottles of water and granola bars and stuff like that. Those are the things that don't get captured on video and get shown on social media, and I just kind of wanted to offer that.
Just let me ask you about that, Maggie, because I think we hear the same type of review and how protests are covered regardless of the issue. If we're talking about people who are behaving maturely and appropriately and offering niceties, the reason I don't think that gets covered is because that's what we should expect of each other. An attaboy for not being a nuisance is kind of, it's kind of detracting from the issue that is really important, is when people are over the top and hurling the expletives, whether it be a big man at a smaller woman or anything else. Because if you're there protesting and the whole concept of peaceful, well, peaceful includes the obvious and the additives that you just put forward. Bottle of water, a granola bar, having conversation. That's a vast difference from some of the other videos that do get showed, because that's when the emotions and behavior step over a line. So obviously they're going to get covered. No one's going to cover someone saying, good morning, how are you? This morning we're interrupting your ability to go to work, and I apologize, and we're trying to get, some forward momentum here for the harvester. That's what we expect of each other. And I get the emotions. I completely understand. And I'm on the receiving end of those things all the time. So
I bet you are.
Yeah. So, I think that's how things get covered and why they get covered that way. What do you think?
Oh, listen, it's far more interesting to see, someone smack a horse on the nose or on the butt than see someone pass someone a bottle of water. I don't disagree with you that those are the reasons that those things get shown. But I do want to offer that that was maybe a 20-minute interaction out of a 6 or 7 hour day. So, and I'm not going to talk about the harvesters' issues. Alfred was just on. He talked about it very eloquently. There's been lots of people. Mr. Effort has gone on. There's lots of people who can talk about the issues in a much better way. I just wanted to comment on, there's a value of disrupting government. Public servants are what make government run. There's no question about that. The value of public servants is immeasurable. Without them, government is useless. The reason that disruptive protests work is because when you interrupt the way that government is working, it makes them realize that there's power in people. And we haven't seen a huge number of disruptive protests over the past 10 years. And I think if you look at the numbers in the last election, voter turnout was incredibly low. It's really discouraging in a democracy to see that lack of engagement. And I'm really hoping, that this type of disruptive protest gives people the feeling that they have power again. You can go out and make a difference. You can vote in people who you think will represent what you want to be represented.
Protest is a cornerstone of civil discourse. I'm not going to say civil disobedience because that implies that disobedience is often associated with physical violence. So the civil discourse is absolutely important. Power of the people, where it belongs, I would suggest, should not belong solely inside the cabinet room or solely on the 8th floor or solely in Parliament. It belongs to the people. But there's a real difference. And I said this to a caller yesterday. Now, let's just say we talk protests in general terms. If there are protesters calling for the genocide of Palestinians versus the humanitarian issues and concerns of children and women starving, they're two different things, right? If we're having people talk about the extermination of Jews versus a meaningful ceasefire to get some, get to some off-ramp for peace, they're two different things. Same thing if you talk about a peaceful protester, whether it be outside Confederation building or anywhere else, versus the folks who let their emotions get the best of them. And that's what's going to get covered. That's what initiates police response. And I'm not saying the magnitude or the intensity of police response was appropriate or right because I wasn't there, so I can't really speak with any actual first-hand knowledge here. And yes, police in riot gear and the presence of horses is intimidating. Of course it is. And I don't know whether or not there's ever going to be a time where if a protest feels the way it did, even if it was just some people for some 20 minutes on a Wednesday, is not going to see some increased police presence on a Thursday. And again, this is not justifying anything that anyone did because I wasn't there. I only saw what I saw on social media. And to your point, we're always going to see those videos shared. We're not going to see handshakes and winks and nods and pleasantries exchanged. We're going to see those things captured and shared. So anyway, I'll let you finish this up, Maggie.
No, those are all really valid points, and I'd never compare the protests Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday to, protests about Palestine or Israel.
No, nor am I trying to do that. I'm just, saying that there's two different things. There's women and children starving versus death to Jews. There are two different messages with people who may have some overlap.
Yeah, for sure. And you're absolutely, I completely agree with you. The tone of protests and the messaging of protests is incredibly important in how we respond to them. So I think there's a lot of value in disrupting government. I do really believe that disruptive protests are something that government really needs to be aware of. They need to train the people who work in the Confederation building on how to handle them and expectations. They need to have a better messaging system for their staff because I truly believe, I'm a union girl, that government, any employer has a responsibility to ensure that their staff aren't going into a potentially unsafe environment. And that includes, when there's disruptive protests happening. I don't think that any staff were, in unsafe conditions. But you're right. When emotions are high, people say and do things that they ordinarily would not do. And I was a little bit concerned to see that government were ready to call in the RNC and the Mounted Horse Unit, but they weren't necessarily ready to let their staff know, maybe stay away for a few hours until we figure this out. And that messaging did go out eventually, but certainly not ahead of time. So then the other thing that was I wanted to touch on really quickly was I did have some concerns. Government went ahead with the budget release at the Confederation building, and I will be a little bit snarky and say I think that's so much pomp and ceremony that, it wasn't necessary. I can understand why they did it. They had to make their point, but the Conservatives weren't there in attendance. The NDP weren't in attendance. I don't think the independent candidate was in attendance. There's certain things that I think should follow a prescribed way of doing things, and I don't think the budget should be presented without debate, despite the fact that the Liberals have a majority. I don't think that media and impacted groups had a really good briefing of what the budget was going to include. Which, Patty, we lived through COVID. We all know how to work remotely. My God, my husband is a fisherman and he does Zoom calls with the committee that he sits on. If my husband can use Zoom, I'm sure the government could use Zoom to release budget details and have media briefing. I don't quite understand the in-person stuff anymore or why that was so restrictive.
Well, people made individual decisions. So as I can't speak from first-hand experience on that front. There's a distinct difference in how the media and business leaders and organised labour and other representative groups were briefed leading into the budget. The same thing could be said for members of the opposition. So when I go to a media lock-in on budget day, it's not only an opportunity to get the information up front so I can absorb $10 billion worth of spending, it's also the ability to have those conversations with other folks who might know more about one industry or another. You get a chance to speak with ministers as they rotate through the room so that you can really have a grasp on what's happening before 2 o'clock when the minister stands in the House of Assembly. So I think some of the way that the protest went on also kind of jeopardized or hampered the ability for those of us in the media and or these other aforementioned groups to actually know what was going on. I bet you there's still a bunch of the people who I mentioned then, they're still trying to figure the budget out, as opposed to had that opportunity to speak amongst themselves, ask questions of the minister, and get the information up front, and so you can take your time to try to figure it out. Because, going into a room, even over the course of 5 hours on $10 billion worth of spending, it's hard to have a real good understanding of it so we can present the information to our readers or listeners or viewers. So some of that was absolutely compromised, but the government made that decision. That's not something that we decided on. So anyway.
Oh, my goodness, no.
Yeah,
no. And I have absolute respect for all the media. I mean, it was a very tough situation for them to be in, absolutely. And I guess, yes, I mean, obviously, I'm going to flip it back onto the government. Was there an urgent need for the budget to be released on Thursday? I guess that's up for debate. People might say yes, people might say no. The interim supply is there. You can put interim supply to make sure that things can continue on.
There's a deadline on that, though, legislatively speaking.
It's April 1st, right? Or
yeah, it's March 31st, midnight. Yeah, you're right.
Yep. So, this all happened last week. And it's only March 26th. Was the urgency really there? That's not for me to say, but I am just saying, I think there was more politics at play with releasing the budget when they did, more so than, the urgent need. The other thing that I did want to say, I do think that there's going to need to be an investigation into whether there was excessive force used by the RNC mounted unit when they were doing their crowd control. And I didn't see the protest the same as you. I was down on the side on a different entrance where things were pretty boring, honestly, but I did watch a number of videos. That's not the full picture for sure, but a number of the videos really demonstrated to me that there were two different approaches being taken. So one mounted RNC officer was doing things one way, the other was doing things a different way. And I do think there needs to be an investigation into whether there was excessive force. And what was the other point that I wanted to make? Yes. So I think a lot of this was caused by, a lot of the protests really came about because of our government's tactics for delays and for, really strategic messaging. It started, I think, on Tuesday when they issued an expression of interest specifically for crab, which isn't what we were asking for, which didn't address our concerns. And then on Friday, we were able to meet with the minister, and suddenly we've kind of been able to get to this agreement. Why couldn't we have gotten to this agreement 2 weeks ago before it had to go to disruptive protests, before we were at the 11th hour of the fishery opening? So I just think there's a lot of things we can work better together, and I hope that we do. I'm not going to comment on Mr. Loader's comments yesterday. I think I sent an email just to argue one of the points, but I think we need to stop pitting all sides against each other and start trying to work together to make the industry a lot better, and that really requires government stepping in and taking a look at how things have developed over the past 20 years.
I appreciate the time this morning. Thanks for the call, Maggie.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. Okay, let's take a break. Mike, you're next. Don't go away.
This is Open Line on the VOCM Big Land FM radio network.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line 3. Mike, you're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy.
Hi, Mike.
I promised you I'd get back to you on this matter of my car, Ford Escape. And not too much to update, only something to torment you more. That's all. I had a conversation with the guy at the company there and brought in some pictures that I had taken from the other garages that I had her in and confirmed to me the line that we're talking about, the antifreeze line, cooling line going into the turbocharger. And the foreman at the place showed me a picture totally different from an eye line, the back end of the eye line going into the motor. And there's nothing could persuade him that he was right and I was wrong in regards to the picture. And I said to him, I guess the other 4 garages that I had her into don't know what they're talking about. If you don't want to believe this, but I said, the picture you're showing me is certainly not the pictures that you showed me when I was in here before. I can't get through to, I've gotten through to the Consumer Management Services regarding the same thing, and she's telling me she's been calling them, the foreman and the shop foreman and supervisor, not getting a return call, and he's telling me that he's called her a number of times and he can't get through to her. So they're beating a dead horse, I suppose, in one sense. But it's not satisfactory to me in regards to what happened in the beginning. If they made a mistake, they should be made pay for it or own up to it or whatever it was. But there's nothing in the world can tell them. And they're still trying to tell me that I have an eye leak. Showed them the picture that I had taken at Tire Auto on Tops of the Road, and the color around the tube going into the turbocharger is greenish yellow. And I said, what is that there? And he said, that's oil. I said, well, you got to be nuts. I'm not stupid altogether. I know the difference of that, whatever. So 2 days ago or 3 days ago, I had her in the first garage that I had her in. And the guy, I told him what they had told me at the company, at the Ford company. And he says, well, I can smell the antifreeze right now. He was doing, putting in a couple of shocks, as a matter of fact, what it was. So, but anyway, that's as far as I got with them. I don't know where else to go, really. The number you gave me at that time when I spoke to you last week that's no longer in service.
Was that Consumer Affairs?
But I did get through to Consumer Management Services. Spoke to a lady, as a matter of fact, 3 times on her, and she was waiting to get a call back from them for some explanation. I don't know if it's wise that I should call Better Business Bureau.
I'll give you a better place to call.
Or what?
I'll give you another option. It's called the Canadian Motor Vehicle Arbitration Plan, CAMVAP. People have great success with this organization, apparently. So all the way from, the service is free, number one. Then there's things you can get reimbursement for repairs. There's all the way at the top of the line for full manufacturer buyback of a vehicle. So this organization has been quite good for many people who I put them on to. I can give you their contact.
Yes, just 1 second. I get a pen and paper ready, Patty. Okay.
The general support line, which I think is probably a good place to start, is 1-800 207 06 85. Yeah.
Okay.
And the website is.
Ask for?
This is called the Canadian Motor Vehicle Arbitration Plan. But if the website is obviously really very easy to navigate as well, because you have to apply to set up the dispute mechanism. So it's just CAMVAP, CAMVAP.ca.
CAMVAP.ca?
Yeah.
Thank you very sincerely for this, Pat.
No problem, because it's right on the home page. It says Home, About CAMVAP, and Have a Dispute. If you go to Have a Dispute, then you click on Before You Apply, and then it walks you through what you need to do, and then moves from stage to stage. But people have had good luck with this particular organization, so give them a try.
I will do. I certainly will. I want to thank you very much for this.
My pleasure.
Okay. Take care.
Good luck, Mike.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, that group, I mean, it can be frustrating. Like most every big industry, right? Once you get tangled up in it, there can be plenty of standoffs, but there are groups out there that have proven to be pretty successful in trying to help people navigate. All right, let's try to get back on track with the breaks. We're going to talk about education reform right after this. Don't go away.
This is Open Line on the VOCM Big Land FM radio network.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 1. Say good morning to the Ward 4 councillor here in the city of St. John's. It's Tom Davis. And Tom, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Good morning.
I just want to say I'm not speaking on my thoughts, just like the thoughts of people who call the show are not the thoughts and feelings and opinions of the city of St. John's. I want to start with a realization I had a week ago when, after getting off the phone with someone, I realized how convincing Stephen Guilbeault, the federal environment minister, must be to get the Prime Minister and his cabinet and all the Liberals, and potentially even the NDP and the Bloc, to fall in line to potentially, in a lot of cases, all those generous pensions and pay and power and prestige that comes along with being a MP, to potentially put all that on the line. And I thought, wow, he must be pretty amazing to be able to convince everybody that. Or else the other conclusion would be that it must be really, really, really bad, because they have access to all the information. They don't live necessarily in echo chambers. They would have the information from every province, from the country, from other countries and other leaders. So, for me, that's caused me to really think a lot. And I think a lot of people should think about that as opposed to...
Think about what?
Well, think about the fact that these MPs who we like to criticize for how much money they make and all the power and prestige and pensions they have, to potentially jeopardize that, given the strength of the conservative axe to tax sort of campaign, to continue to vote for the carbon tax, for example. Right now, very unpopular policy within the country. So for me, I just think a lot of people need to reflect on the fact that generally politicians don't do difficult things when a lot of people are screaming at them to stop doing it. Like, as a rule, they will generally walk backwards, like what just happened last week with the fishery, for example, as a small example. Generally, if you scream loud enough, politicians generally will reverse course. And the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, including the local MPs who are Liberal, have, with the exception of Ken McDonald, have stayed in lockstep with that policy. And, so for me, I think people should reflect on, is that courage, or is that just the realization that they don't really have any choice how quickly their legacy will be reflected by the choices they make when it comes to the climate? It's a thought. And the other thing that is interesting to me is that we're very quick to be critical of grocery stores, and there's fairly small margin, relatively speaking, but nowhere in the public discourse is criticism of the oil companies and the countries that benefit from the oil. We complain the 23% raise in the carbon tax on April 1st, on Monday, is only 3 cents, relatively speaking. But last week the price of gasoline went up 7 cents, and that obviously had nothing to do with that. So, it interests me that people aren't critical of the oil industry and the Saudi Arabias and the Middle East and the United States and Canada and all the different countries. And
can't we just take them all as different conversations? I mean, that's what I try and do. And I speak to these things as standalones. There's obviously going to be overlaps when we talk about big things like the price of a barrel of oil, its relationship to a price of a litre of fuel. But, not all of these things are created equal. Taking them one by one and talk about the impact they have as standalone policy is how I try to approach it, versus try to bunch everything all into one conversation. 10 cents federal excise tax, provincial gas tax, carbon tax, HST on, because they all have different feels and flares and responsibilities.
No, 100%. What I'm saying is that people, as a rule, we don't seem to be overly critical of the dollar or whatever there is of a price of gasoline that is involved in refining, retail, production. And we obviously have control over that by how much we consume and the choices we make to a certain degree. I mean, I'm just throwing this out to think about. Again, for me, the 3 cent rise in carbon tax that happens on Monday will impact people, but not to the same degree as OPEC deciding to reduce production. as a small example.
Yeah, sure. But of course, we have more opportunity to speak to things we have some control over, politically speaking, which does not include OPEC. So I guess that's sometimes how people break things down. You can control what you can control. Secondly, when, some of the hypocrisy out there really kind of irritates me to no end. I understand people's frustration with the increased cost of living, whether that be because of inflationary pressures or the Bank of Canada benchmark rate or every other contributing factor under the sun. But the hypocrisy that I'm speaking of is, for instance, like for out west. The premiers out west, whether it be the way Scott Moe's talking about it or Danielle Smith, and they want the tax gone in full. Not a pause on April 1. They want it gone in full. At the exact same time, the province of Alberta is raising the provincial gas tax 4 cents. A cent more than the carbon tax implication. So they really want to have their cake and eat it too, which is not available in this world, for better or worse.
And as well, we allow certain things to be said out loud, and they become like part of our whole conversation. Like, for example, the cost of groceries are going up because of carbon tax. However, I just had a friend of mine came back from Florida. He couldn't believe that a big bag of Lay's was $4.99 American with a 40% exchange rate. And obviously, the United States has no carbon tax, and the price of their fuel is way less than ours, no matter how you cut it. And so, again, the complexity and the critical thinking that needs to go in to all these processes is all what I want to bring around to the education reform.
Well, I mean, food inflation in the United States is worse than it is in Canada. And, of course, as you rightfully point out, they do not have a carbon tax in place. And when people talk about what's the right way to discuss big global issues like climate change, the unfortunate path for many is just go straight to the carbon tax and the fact you don't like it. Not dealing with it and understanding the impact of droughts and floods and supply chains on the price of food is not necessarily generally included in the conversation, but it has a massive implication. But unfortunately, we just can't get enough people to, round it out beyond the carbon tax. I mean, the worldwide insurers' loss regarding to catastrophic weather events, fires and floods and earthquakes, $100 billion plus. For 4 years running, $100 billion plus. The Disaster Emergency Fund federally in this country has been record levels 4 years straight. So we know there's something going on. What we need to do about it and collective cooperation, and whether or not a carbon tax or price on pollution or putting the focus on the large emitters versus me, that's where the conversation belongs, as opposed to just simple sloganeering. Axe tax. Oh, there you go. Everything's solved.
Most people have at their disposal the ability to do a lot of research. And critical thinking involves looking at all sides and trying to weigh it out. And I would just encourage people to do that. And part of I'm hoping part of the education reform process that we're going through, the education accord that they're talking about, will go up to a higher level, to 30,000 feet, and not just focus necessarily what happens in our schools, but to realize that we have a very disruptive technology coming at us, AI. So that's going to impact the type of people we should even be educating, how they should be. And obviously we have a large shortage of tradespeople, both presently and going into the future. And I'm hoping they'll take that perspective. But when I look at the benefits of the last 50 years or so, when the standard of living in Newfoundland and Labrador, or 70 years, say, has dramatically increased to the point where it's not sustainable anymore. And unfortunately, during that process, the government took the sale of non-renewable resources and borrowing to inflate our spending permanently. I mean, it's hard baked in, and without continued revenue or borrowing, then that's going to continue. So, to my mind, we need to not only start with the young people, but we need to have a bigger conversation of how we as adults model for the children. What are they seeing? What's the messaging that we talk about? Do we embrace work ethic, or do we embrace the opposite of that? How do we value our seniors and the wisdom that they have? How do we look at our industries, like the fishing industry, to transform them so that they're sustainable? The complexity of mega projects and the impact that they have on the labor market is pretty significant. When the U.S. bases were being built in Newfoundland, at the time, the leaders were concerned about the disruption it might have to the labor, so they actually paid Newfoundlanders less because they wanted them, when the base was built, to go back to doing what they were doing before, fishing or logging or all those other type of things. Because what happens is when you pay a group of people a lot more than the market can sustain, then government has to increase how much they pay their employees, and private sector companies have to pay how much they pay their employees. And then you get in the situation where when that mega project or the amount of money that injects into the economy, like a lot of it borrowed, when that goes away, then people can't afford to build houses and people can't afford to renovate houses. And nobody... People who made $100 an hour have a hard trouble going back to $25 an hour because generally they've inflated their standard of living. And you have all this disruption.
That's individual-based decisions. I don't know how we can, tell people that you can't live the way you think you would like to live, whether that be living on your credit card, line of credit, or otherwise. Those are very personal decisions that people make, and oftentimes, given the record level of household debt, we're making some pretty poor ones. Tom, I do have to get to the break. You mentioned AI very quickly. A story in Bloomberg that I read last night. AI is going to drive electricity demand from the UK data centres up by 500% over the next 10 years. That's according to National Grid. Interesting story. I appreciate the time, Tom. Thanks for the call.
Take care, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye. Let's take a break. Come back for the budget. Don't go away.
This is Open Line on the VOCM Big Land FM radio network.
And welcome back to the program. Where am I going? Let's go to line number 2. Take more to the PC member for Conception Bay South. That's Barry Petton. Barry, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you?
Not too bad. How about you?
I'm good, thanks. Patty, I'm calling in to discuss some issues with the budget and it's pertaining to my district, actually, and a couple of issues that I've spoke out a lot about. I've asked a lot in the House Assembly. I've probably spoken to you about. I know we spoke a lot about Frank Roberts. In any event, Patty, in politics, sometimes you try to find the best approach, and my approach was I had lots of dialogue with both ministers on, especially on the Frank Roberts issue. I mean, I had two ministers actually come towards school with me. It was a lot of outrage last year, as you remember, with the rodents and the dirt, and the parents. There was rallies, there was protests, and what have you. And I mean, I wrote a letter 2 years ago requesting the school be put on the list for replacement, and as recently as last fall, before school opened, me and the current minister Howell took it towards school, and we had a great conversation. We had a great tour. She acknowledged that the school wasn't in dire straits. So I think her words were probably one of the worst in the province, and what have you. And I played the game, and I told her up front, I said, I'm not going to be coming hard at you on this. I understand, I can't convince you anymore. You know the issue, and I trust that it will be taken into consideration. And after about 2 weeks, I guess, Patty, for the budget, I was being told, hang on for the budget to come, and we'll see. So I was optimistic. Not that I was going to probably get announced for a new school, but put on the list for replacement. That takes years. People don't realize it's not next year you get a new school. This could take 5 to 6 years. So, it's a growth area. The enrollment numbers are growing every year. It's it's in Flagstrap, which is at the center of my district, and it's one of the biggest feeder schools out there. 650 children in that junior high school, Patty. They don't have a cafeteria. They got a large classroom is all they have. They don't have a cafeteria. There's lots of issues ongoing, plumbing issues. There's eating issues. The school is just, I said this term before, it's past its best before date. So, to say I was frustrated and disappointed is probably an understatement, but it just left, it didn't sit well with me because, I had, the dialogue I had and every indication I had was leading me to believe that there was something going to be done about this. You don't acknowledge that school is probably the worst in the province and then have no action. And, again, it's, and I know the politics. I'm not the right political stripe. I get all that. Been around a long time and understand, but I also realized, too, I represent 28,000 people in CBS, even though they're not all in my district, but I represent the big force in CBS, and the people up there deserve better. The children deserve better, and the parents and the, teachers and everyone alike, they deserve better. And, I've spoken to many parents since the budget last week, and my commitment to them was I'm not going to stop lobbying. I did supposedly play the game and give the department and the minister time to, do their work. Obviously, it fell on deaf ears, and I guess I'm going to start making that issue, be loud and clear on that issue, and as well as many other in my district, which obviously is what I'm elected to do. But, I wanted to bring that to the attention of your listeners and hopefully people in my own district that I'm not pleased, and I will be continuing to fight because I think it's outrageous that the school was not put on the list to be replaced. Just to add it to the list to start the planning is just mind-boggling. And other than politics, there's no other reason in my mind that it's other than, it's petty politics, and it's, we're seeing it, I also, on a second, and tied to that as well, it was we have no health service up there, and I spoke to you about this before too. And I mean, I'm at nauseam speaking to the minister about it, and I was of the opinion that there may be something moving along in the budget on that. Of course, I think there may have been, but it seems like this family care clinic announced for down in Portugal, Sesame Ballallen, and the newly appointed Fred Hunton's district. And I guess if anyone want to look up what pork barrel politics is, it's not hard to find, and I see that. I see resemblance to that happening all over the place. He's checking boxes, and obviously, if you're not on the right team, they're going to try to play that game, and you're better to be a Liberal than a PC because we'll do better for you. But I think the voters are smarter than that, and the public, and they expect better from their elected officials.
Yeah, fair enough. In the world of education and infrastructure, there's nothing new in this budget. The only additional line item is $50,000 to evaluate the Paradise High School, of which I have no earthly idea what $50,000 gets you on that front. So we're still looking at the same schools. We're looking at Cartwright, Kenmount Terrace, I can see from here. We still don't know what grades or how many students are talking about serving there. Portugal Coast St. Phillips, as of course is the bone for people in Paradise to pick. And then Peely's Island. Same four schools that were on the budget last year. And the number here is, I think, $41 million. And there's about $145 million, I think, over the course of 3 years to advance those projects. So nothing's really changed in the education infrastructure in this budget beyond $50,000.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing, Paddy. And I've talked to people in those other communities that question that too. I mean, Paradise School down there, for instance, $50,000. I mean, there's not a lot of money if you're supposed to be planning a school. To me, it's almost like to say, pretend we're doing something. I mean, this school was originally announced in 2015. And, again, I'll go back to Frank Robertson. To not have that even put on the list, it may not cost nothing. It may not cost any, probably the cheapest thing you could ever do. Put it on the list and give people the hope that, okay, we acknowledge that the school needs replaced and needs upgrades. We're working towards that. To just leave it off and just totally ignore the needs of the people in my district is offensive, Patty. And I'll also add in the infrastructure piece of a family care clinic. I mean, CBS is. I sent a message to both ministers after the budget and expressed my disappointment. But I said to Minister Osborne, sweet Lord, I think it was the words I used. Do I have to convince you anymore that I got a district up there? I don't have public transit, Patty. I don't have no public transit, so I'm too close to St. John's, but I'm a million miles away. When you factor in those other issues, how am I going to access the service is a huge issue, except myself. And I'm lacking family doctors. I'm lacking healthcare services. I hear it every day. I talk to my constituents every day, and it's a problem. And I've been dealing with, and we got 2 or 3 blood collection clinics, fee-for-service blood collection clinics, and then you're going to put a new family care clinic down in Portugal, St. Phillips. And I'm not against that. Good for them. But you're going to leave CBS out and you're going to do that one first. That defies logic. You look at the distance from the acute care centre alone. It makes no sense to me, other than the fact it's politics. And I've been around politics long enough to understand that. But somewhere along the way, you've got to use common sense and you've got to be fair to the people in this province because we're all taxpayers. Regardless of CBS or PC, represented by PC, or you're represented by an NDP or Liberal, we're all taxpayers. And it's public money. It's not Andrew Fury's or Tom Osborne's or Crystalline Owl's money. It's our money, mine, yours, and everyone else. And I really find it offensive. I truly find it totally offensive, and I'm calling it what it is. And I'm going to be continuing this call because I'm not impressed, and I'll be making that case known. And I think we as people in this province, the budget, there's nothing new in it, and it should be more. Maybe it should be less spending. I don't know. I'm hearing the credit agency saying that, but that's irrelevant. That's not my issue today. My issue today is, you got to treat people fairly, and I don't think this government is treating people fairly in this budget, and I know my district is not being treated fairly, and that I take great offence to.
I appreciate the time, Barry. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Paddy. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. What schools should be built, where and when, should be based on very fundamentals. Student enrollment numbers, population growth. That's the only factors that we can really put in play, not what might be politically expedient or politically advantageous. The same thing with roads. Roads decisions should be made by civil engineers, period. Conditions, priorities, and of course grey area for things where, unforeseen washouts and what have you, and bridge work that might pop up that needs to be done, like the Canning Bridge or whatever else. So there's always going to be political intervention. Why? Because we're talking about politics. But it cannot be the sole decision-making metrics. It just can't be. Population, student enrollment, age of the population. And Paradise meets all of those requirements to see it get a high school. right? And whether or not Frank Roberts needs to be on a list to give people in that area comfort that whether it be full-on renovations and or replacement, and the roads, civil engineers, you tell us what roads should be done. Let's let Leo hang on because I don't want to shortchange him here with just a minute on the clock before we get to the news. So, yeah. And again, I know there's a bit of a pandemic of reductive thinking out there. And again, when we talk about the big complicated issues of the world that I don't pretend to have a full grasp on necessarily, but like the climate change conversation becomes difficult to have with most folks because they just can only hang their hat on one thing, and that's a carbon tax. And this guy Mike, who picks at me all the time, and there's lots of reasons why there's no reason to have any faith in what he says, is, the concept of if you just pay the government more tax, you'll have fewer storms. Again, the straight up reductive thought on something that is a big deal is an actual conversation that we should be having. Like, for instance, I don't know what you think about climate change, but the oil companies, they understand their contribution to it. The insurance companies, they understand the implications. The numbers are undeniable about how things have changed with severity and prolonged floods and droughts and earthquakes and the like. It's not to say that a carbon tax is going to stop Fiona from blowing. That's not the point. There's also a cost associated with not trying to do something. So I think the way the carbon tax is currently structured is deeply flawed. If even, and I know this is not accurate enough, if Minister Guilbeault says 8 out of 10 get more back in rebate compared to what they pay, that's not really 100% accurate, and I don't think we need to hang our hat on that either. But there's also a conversation, like if you hear someone say, well, I'm going to lean on technology or innovation, fine, but what does that mean? Because we're just kind of talking about things at 100,000 feet above sea level. So what technology? Carbon capture? Carbon capture is certainly the choice for the fossil fuel companies. They just came from the COP meetings with more lobbyists that have ever prior attended, pushing for those types of concepts. So is that a good thing? Does it work? How much the cost? What are the benefits? Some of the cost comparisons and the issues for context and comparatively speaking. Let's take a break. Leo, you're next to talk about the good old fishery.
This is Open Line on the VOCM Bigland FM radio network.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go. Line number 3. Leo, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Morning to you.
I've been watching the ruckus with the fishery this last week or so, and I can't help but think, the more things have changed, the more they say stay the same, eh? That was all I was saying. But I fished, I was on the Labrador when I was 18 years old, and that was my second year. But first year I was there, Bain Johnson owned Battle Harbour, and the next year that I went down, Earl Brothers owned it. But in the spring of the year, before we went fishing, that's the shearman, now we were shearmen, we had to go in and sign a paper in order to get a bit of rubber clothes and tobacco and stuff like that. And I remember that the skipper, that was of our crew, there were 3 or 4 of us in the boat, but we went in, he was 75 years old, and we went in and stood up. We went in this basement sort of thing, and there was a few barrels over in the corner and a pile of net there and a couple of packages somewhere else spread all over the place in sort of a dark, dungy place. And we went in and stood up before the desk, and the skipper told him my name, and then he got me to sign the paper. And when we walked out, when we came out through the door, the skipper turned on me and he said, "My son," he said, "you're ignorant, or whatever." And I looked at him like a fool and said, "Why?" He said, and I noticed then that he had his cap in his hand. And he said, "When you go in there," he said, "you're supposed to take off your cap." But I often thought about it afterwards, and related to that, a couple of weeks afterwards, we went down for some supplies. We went down for salt and other things. But anyway, we took on the salt, and we had a barrel of gasoline, and I was getting it set up. We had a winch on the wharf, aside the wharf, to winch the barrel of gasoline down in the boat. And anyway, I was getting it rigged up to winch the barrel down in the boat, and Galera come along, and he said, "Hold on there, my son." And he got down, and he stood on the forward top, and he picked up, or he lifted the barrel of gasoline, and he took it in his arms, and he walked back over the salt that was in the boat and lodged it down by the back, in the back of the boat. And I thought about it. I've often thought about it since, I wonder, probably only foolish talk about, but I wonder that probably he heard that I had been disrespectful. Somebody from up along now, and I had been disrespectful, and he just showed me what I was dealing with. Wondered about it afterwards. Yeah.
So when you open up saying the more things change, the more they say the same, what are you making that relation to with the fisheries deal that was struck on Friday?
On Friday, well, what I'm looking at now with these fellows, now they're demonstrating due to the fact that they've got to go to the buyers with their hat in their hand to a certain extent to get the buyers to buy their fish or not. That's what I'm looking at.
Well, I think the crux of the issue for the harvesters, they were saying they're sick of being told what they can do and what they cannot do and the restrictions in place.
Yeah.
Which I think makes sense. Whether or not it's going to work, I guess, remains to be seen.
Yeah. Well, we were the same 7 years ago. The Earl Brothers were the buyers, and they told us what we could do or what we couldn't do. But then that was in the later parts of that way that worked. Because later on, a couple of years afterwards, the schooners come in there and start buying over the side, buying salt bulk over the side. And that sort of took away their power because at that time, they had full power, over the people, say, in Cape Charles, Henley Harbor, all over the place, in that area.
Okay, fair enough.
They had to sell to Earl Brothers or not sell at all.
Yeah. Now, look, I completely understand where they're coming from because, they give classic examples. There's other industries where they produce whatever product, and we're not telling those folks where they can and cannot sell. We're not telling them how much they can and cannot do in the run of, the course of a season. The fishery's long been a strange beast, and every single year, the problems remain the same. They really have. Now, this decision made recently about examining foreign interest in the processing sector, potential to expand the processing sector, the allowance of outside buyers, that's what was asked of or demanded by the fish harvesters, and they're getting it. And we'll see if it works. If it does, great. And if it doesn't, then I guess we've got to go back to the drawing board because I don't really know exactly how it's going to play out. We've had some people suggest maybe 20% of the product will leave the province. Had our fish harvester on earlier, Alfred, saying he thinks very little to none will leave the province. So a lot of grey and a lot of distance between 20 and 0.
I don't know, Paddy. I can remember when we could, if you wanted a fish, you put out you went out and got a fish. If you wanted a salmon, you went out and got a salmon. You wanted a lobster, you got but that right was taken away from us, and we're not allowed to do it now. And I'm going to go and jump to something else now, and I'm going to talk about this fellow that phones in every now and then. His name is Peter. I don't know what his last name is, but I do know that his name is Peter. And he seems to think that the food fishery is going to have an effect on his fishery. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to tell Peter he better look in his own corners before he starts criticizing the food fishery or worrying about what that's going to take away from him, because he's taken in one trip as much as the food fishery is taken. And not only that, there was a fellow on here early this morning. He's telling us what's happening. They're dumping tons, hundreds of tons, thousands of tons in the dumps, in the garbage dumps. Not only that, they're sluicing it down to the chutes, thousands of tons of fish. And then he's worried about the bit of fish that this food fisheries are going to take.
Yeah, the anecdotal number that people use is somewhere in the neighbourhood of 1% of the fish taken out of the water through the course of the cod fishing season is from the recreational food fishery. Whether or not that's true, I don't really know. He did go on to talk about unallocated catch tonnage in different regions, which I'm not 100% sure exactly what that refers to, whether it be what you just said, sluicing it down the chute and or wastage and or things that are graded beyond sea. I don't know. But there's, I would imagine, very little of the total catch of cod is in the recreational food fishery. I can't imagine it being a whopping big total. And of course, if we want to come up with that number, then there's going to have to be something, like a logbook or something or other put in place. People don't want to do it, and I understand why, because I don't want to do it either. But we're just going to argue back and forth with no real firm understanding of what the number is.
No, I mean, he quoted a number of 90,000 food fishery, 90,000 people in the food fishery that applied for it or whatever. But I mean, say, out of that 90,000, I mean, say there might be half of them, or probably 75% or whatever, that's not going to take a fish. And I mean, say, when we talk about sluicing it down to the chutes, I mean, say, that was a well-known fact that when they were buying capelin for the Japanese market, the Japanese never took nothing, only the spawn capelin. So the male capelin was thrown away. I mean, so when you start talking about a dump load of crab, not a dump truck load of crab, come on, there's a lot of fish, or not whatever, a lot of crab. And it's been thrown, it's been dumped in the garbage. And not only that, I mean, say he spoke about his rotting on the wharf, and then a fellow like Peter come on and criticize the food fishery, and he's part of this.
Yeah, and again, there has been a petition tabled by Clifford Small in the House of Commons regarding the food fishery and expanding the dates. I think that's what provoked his call, is that he thinks it's probably enough taken by the current 39 days. So we'll see what the minister thinks. I don't imagine there's going to be a whole lot of change. And I still never understand why DFO makes us wait until the 11th hour when they announce virtually the exact same dates and the exact same boat limits year over year, 39 days, off we go. So if anything's going to change, well, it remains to be seen, I guess.
By the way, before I finish this, sure. I made a big summer day. Here I made $600. We started in May, I guess, middle of May, and probably went out until the middle of September, October. And we were on the water 4 o'clock in the morning, and we were in the stage on probably 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the night. So that was a big year for me.
Huge.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for listening.
That's why you're living high on the hog these days.
Yes, that's right. It's a pet day out there, and I'm living off the government.
Appreciate the time, Leo.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, let's take a break. We'll go back to the president of the NLTA, Trent Langdon. He joins us to talk about some information they garnered through the Access to Information Act regarding violence in the schools. Trent, after this. Don't go away.
This is Open Line on the VOCM Big Land FM radio network.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2. Say good morning to the president of the NLTA. That's Trent Langdon. And good morning, Trent. You're on the air.
Morning, Paddy. Certainly want to take advantage to give you a shout this morning based on our recent press conference we just had.
I've seen the email, but I've only had a chance to give it a very quick perusal. So based on the Access to Information request that you got some information, what do we know?
Right. So we had done an ATIP request there was basically 4 sources: RCMP, RNC, the Newfoundland and Labrador English School District at the time, and the Conseil Scolaire, the French school district, of reported violent incidents or aggression in schools over that time period of a year. And so it was, with regards to what we've received, we put together a report with some independent work being done related to that. And it's very disconcerting what we're seeing. The numbers are certainly in line with what I'm hearing anecdotally from the members, that if things stay the same, we're going to see a 40% increase this year, or this school year, in terms of the number of violent incidents. And that's relative to last year. So, for example, last year or pre-COVID, we would have seen 20 incidents per day, whereas just in the first 2 months alone of this school year, there was 29 per day.
So, how does this get reported? And how does this flow up the chain? Because, like many things and many industries or portfolios, there's all these silos where not everybody knows exactly what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So how does this get collected and disseminated?
Right. So ultimately, it would fall on the teachers and the administrators, and sometimes the parents too. Obviously, that follows through in severity or it's severe enough, I should say, to follow through to the police. There would be a police report, sometimes done by parents, sometimes done by the administrators, and so on. But in school, there's a program called Review 360, and so what that is ultimately a database of any behavioral concern or issue that arises for individual children. Now, obviously, we didn't get access to any identities related to all this, but we just saw trends and numbers. And as a teacher myself, I've entered many an entry into Review 360. And what happens is then at any given time, a teacher who works with that child can type in the child's name and see the history of what's occurred for that child.
It's amazing stuff. And just in case people missed a number here, in 2018-19, 3,562 reported incidents of violence during 185 teaching days of that school year. In the current school year, 997 violent incidents reported over the course of 38 teaching days. I mean, it's truly extraordinary. And then there's the concept out there that things are being underreported. Is that because the children don't come forward, or is it because it's reduced to a no big deal at the teaching level or the administrative level?
Well, several things. Obviously, as you said, we don't know about they've happened. Sometimes teachers, you might imagine if you got 30, 35 children in front of you to have the time to sit down and make an entry into a system, it then has to happen at the end of the day, and by virtue of just fall off, it doesn't happen because of the other needs that are pressing. And sometimes, I'll be honest, some of our members have said, they say, look, we've reported this day in, day out, and nothing changes, so why do it? So, it's a combination of all that leads to the underreporting.
What are we using to define or what constitutes violence? Does it always have to be physical? Because that's what people think is, some people might include the fact that if you are taunted relentlessly, some people might consider it violence. But what are we using for a definition? Physical violence?
No, not at all. It's certainly that. That's obvious. It's like anything. You're talking about domestic violence, talking about anything. Throughout history, it seems as if the only thing that people take note of is the bruising and so on. But we know full well that there's other types of aggression, and that could be threats. It could be harassment. So it's all of that in addition to the physical, any type of emotional abuse as well. So that's to your point. It's many times things will probably go under the radar because of people just don't see it, and that's why it's so important for the teachers in the system when we're working with our children is that we're tracking these kids. We're doing our best to support them.
Do we have a further breakdown? So let's just say a threat, because a threat of violence, I think, is fairly constitutes an act of, as opposed to saying your mother dresses you funny, which hopefully is not recorded as an act of violence. So do we have a breakdown, say, for instance, that a student comes forward and says, this other student threatened to hurt me physically or threatened to kill me or whatever the case may be. Do we have any idea whether or not those threats actually manifest themselves in an act of physical violence? Because that's where some of the tracking is lacking. I know this is a different conversation versus, say, chronic absenteeism, but you can't have one without the other to get a firm grasp on what's happening and what needs to be done.
Right. Okay. So within Review 360, which is the tracking mechanism I just mentioned, there are opportunities to try and break it down as to what categories they fall in. And so depending on who's doing the entry, some people may view it differently. But the numbers we have, I'll just give you an example. In 2018-19, which is pre-COVID, there was... let me see. Let's pick one. There was fighting, for example. There was 975 incidents reported of fighting in Review 360, and along with would also potentially include police reports. Striking of school staff by a student was 538 times. So that's extremely excessive. We know full well that some of those would include children who cannot choose to do otherwise because of their exceptionality, and we fully understand. We go into this work. Everything needs to be done to prevent that, but there's going to be occasions where a child doesn't know the difference and will make that move. But we're seeing more and more that a significant number of those are physical interactions with staff, and we're not even talking about the other pieces, as you said, of the non-physical. So that's just a couple of numbers. 538 for striking, and now this is pre-COVID. In the 2 months of 23-24, there had already been 243 reported, and I'm sure there's many that hadn't been. And striking of staff was 173.
How often do things like, for instance, there's, people are going to give others a hard time by saying, a threat being considered and documented as an act of violence is a stretch, when in fact it's actually it can be a crime. So we can't just downplay for the sake of the fact that no punches were thrown, because it could indeed be a serious matter. Now, I will say that the general teasing of which has gone on forever and a day is not necessarily constitutes violence, even though it might be recorded as such. In the world of actual striking, do we know how often this has made it beyond a school report to a police report? Because they're also two vastly different things.
Right, and as I said, I'm just purely repeating numbers I see in front of me here. No doubt there's times where they haven't made the school report. You know, we do what we can as staff to work with families to figure out what's going on with the child. Many times we try to find a way to address things in the house. And it sometimes doesn't result or need to go to that next level. No,
I guess I was just wondering how many have been considered serious enough for it to make it to that level, as opposed to you slapped me, I slapped you, we get called down to the office. There's a big difference there between what we saw at PwC and other acts of actually not bullying, actual crimes.
Well, yeah, that's my point. So working at junior high school myself, I know full well if it's just an interaction between a couple of young fellows who made a poor decision, I work through that, and that often doesn't make its way through. And I don't. In some cases, I don't even inform the parent because we worked through, no one's gotten hurt, and it was just an altercation. But if it comes to a point where it's chronic, where it's certainly leading to bullying, if someone's injured, we had to report it, or if there's a threat down the road of it continuing. So we work day in, day out to keep these, because if every incident, I'd be on the phone every second minute calling a parent. And plus, we're not building any type of responsibility amongst these children if we're pulling parents in. But my rule of thumb has always been we'll pull parents in if it's a safety issue or if it's something that's chronic that needs to change. Otherwise, we need to build some independence. So to answer your question, many of these incidents sometimes are handled, and we view them that every altercation with another child is not bullying. It can be viewed as such, but we know full well that it isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm seeing emails out of the corner of my eye talk about the fact that, we've exaggerated the definition of violence, what have you. But that's one thing. If I'm a 54-year-old man sitting here listening to this program this morning, maybe I'm thinking exactly that. The world has changed. Everyone's so soft that we've lost control. We're mollycoddling people. But try to put yourself back to when you were 8 years old. The threat can be something else, because the same thing when we talk about bullies. Well, just hit back. But most people who say that have never thrown a punch in their life, number one. And to be a full-grown adult and to hear these definitions being offered, say, well, the world has changed for the worse. It doesn't mean that it's not traumatic and has a negative impact on an 8-year-old.
Yeah, and I guess to respond to whenever someone questions me, whether it be personally or professionally in these types of realms, I say, look, you really kind of got to have done time in a school to fully understand and appreciate what's going on, because I said in the press conference earlier, society has changed. So anything that you see on the front page of any newspaper or on the front on the web page of news that's going on in the community is happening in our schools. So we have kids attending school who are homeless. We have newcomers who are still living at hotels. We have families that are struggling in poverty. We have parents who may have drug addictions. We have children who have drug addictions. Children coming to school with parents who are incarcerated. So that is experiencing itself in our schools day in, day out. We're a cross-section of society. So that complexity of the school system, as you said, to one individual to say, look, no, that can't be that way. It wasn't that way in 1983. This is a different world right now. And the fact that we have school shortages, staff shortages, I should say. For example, if we have 40 teachers on staff and we're short 6 teachers that day, that's a significant drop in the support that's needed for those individuals. And when you're talking wait lists for mental health services, you're talking about wait lists for addiction services. That weight falls back onto the schools to keep the home fires burning, so to speak.
Class composition has some sort of contributing factor. And, I draw not direct straight lines, but certainly dotted lines between a lot of these things. How many children today are not in school because they are fearful of their so-called bully? You have to imagine there's a fair number of those. So how that contributes to things like the lack of ability for that child to catch up because the teacher is also trying to deal with children with very complex needs, what that contributes to the overall drop in math, science, and reading scores. All of these things are inherently linked. Maybe not straight lines, but absolutely overlaps of legitimate concern. So what do you want people to do with this information? Whether it be the minister responsible or parents, because there's a change in the way you're allowed to discipline a child in school. There's a change in the way people are disciplining their own children at home. So what do you want people to do with what they're hearing?
Right, and so I'm speaking directly to government with this regard, and I'm also speaking to parents. What we need is parents to be vocal, to say, look, I know full well, your child may be going through the school system right now, and everything seems fine. But I've seen many a case where a family's been going through fine, all of a sudden there's been an altercation at school, and it totally disrupts the child's experience. I also work with many families who have had a nightmarish experience going through school because their child is being victimized. So, there's all of this, again, makes its way back through. So to answer your question, I'm appealing to the public to say, look, you have a responsibility, and it will benefit communities to have stronger school systems, because you know full well that I really believe the schools are a heartbeat of these communities. And number two, I'm putting out a plea to government to say, look, we had a teacher think tank just a couple of weeks ago. The Minister of Education was there, heard the entire thing. We had a teacher on there talk about how she had been physically assaulted by an 8-year-old and is now looking at facial reconstruction by virtue of that assault. And the Premier was there and spoke directly to her, saying, I'm so sorry you had to experience that. And then I get a budget come down the pipes and is not even in the highlights. So not enough is being done, and I know that's a common phrase from union. I get it all, but we have enough information here now, and the public is to benefit if we have a stronger school system. And I'm talking to that parent who has a child in school today. You need to know that your child is going to be a service as best as possible. So I'm just two pleas to parents and to the Premier.
I appreciate your time, Trent. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paddy.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too.
Again, sharing the numbers and whether or not you think the appropriate definition has been applied, the fact of the matter is, the way the school system operates and the success therein, academic and societal achievement, is in all our best interest. It doesn't matter if you have a child in school, right? It just doesn't matter at all. Because at some point, the next wave of graduates and workers are going to have to be well-rounded, well-educated, actual contributing members of society. And so these numbers are not to make anyone fearful or to exaggerate an issue. The simple fact of the matter is, we know, regardless if you're talking about bullying, we know that the outcomes are not where they need to be. So let's just back violence out in full. The fact that this is not the number one headline in the province is really confusing to me. Math, science, and reading scores have fallen off the roof. In this province, worse in the country, 29% fall off in math scores. Regardless of how and why that is something. And so that's not an exaggeration of a definition that's young or old or tough or soft. It's just the facts of the matter. All the students being measured by the same set of standards right across the country, right across the modern world. There's where we are. And if part of the contributing factor is violence or chronic absenteeism or the change in curriculum, the lack of discipline, the lack of accountability, it's probably a little bit of all of those columns. So again, it's not to freak everybody out. It's just to point out that maybe, just maybe, this education accord or task force is long overdue and has a lot of work to be done. Let's take a break. Don't go away.
This is Open Line on the VOCM Bigland FM radio network.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2. Pauline, you are on the air.
Hi, Paddy. I was talking to you on March the 7th about... I was at St. Clair's in the corridor on the 7th.
Yes, ma'am. I remember the call.
Yeah. Now, I ended up going down to the Miller Centre that day. So I was down there for 2 weeks, and I got home this past Friday. But I'm still recovering for it. But the nurses down there, they were really good, and the OT and physio and everyone tried to help me. So I'm trying to get back on my feet. Now, we're on 2. I have stairs, and they want me to go up and down stairs now. But they told me I have to try to get another spot. And if I move out of here, I'm at Northview with Northview Properties. And if I move out of here, they want $500 if I move with them in another apartment. They want.
Yes, I heard that part. So you're still in that same predicament?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm only getting welfare, And I don't know how I'm going to come up with $500.
And when does this have to be done by?
Well, there's a place, there's another place on Keene Place. It's available on May the 1st, which I might be able to get. So I won't be able to leave here until then. So I don't know what I can do.
It's a desperate situation to find yourself in.
It is.
So there's a couple of property managers that listen to the show and sometimes offer helpful solutions. And if something like that comes to pass here today, we'll be sure to get you whatever helpful information we can.
Okay, I appreciate that.
I appreciate the update this morning.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Be well, Pauline.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
All right, let's keep rolling here. Let's go to line 1. Otto, you're on the air.
Good morning, Billy.
Morning to you.
Well, what a lovely day, eh?
'Tis beautiful. Can't wait to get out for a walk.
I haven't got that package yet.
I was off last week, and I checked the mailbox as frequently as I could, and I haven't seen it yet either. So, fingers crossed, at least hopefully I get it back.
Yeah, unreal. Paddy, what did the fishermen gain for that protest?
That's a fair question. So, basically, the things they asked for, pretty much they got them all. The most important one they talked about, well, I guess there's two, is to allow buyers from wherever in the world to come and buy their product here and take it elsewhere. They also wanted to see things like expansion inside the processing sector, increased capacity, because as they said last year, say for instance, if we just talk snow crab, which is probably not fair because a lot of other valuable species are landed, they were saying that, tens of thousands of pounds were dumped. People were unable to sell their cod, things like that. So they pretty much got what they want.
Like the plant workers now, if they're going to sell the nose culture, they're going to have a job. No processing in plant site.
Well, it depends. I don't think anybody really knows what's going to happen. The association will say that if some 20% possibly leave, that of course that's going to impact jobs. We had another fish harvester call today, says he thinks that very little to anything will leave the province. So I guess we'll all find out at the same time how it's going to work this year.
Yeah, it's unreal. Raw Gwynland is going to take everything over. I heard now that they're taking over Williams in Arnold Cove.
I'd be surprised if Alberto was going to sell at this moment in time. It's the only year-round cod operation in the province, so I haven't heard that myself.
Oh, I heard it because my daughter-in-law and her grandson works there, right? He's on the forklift and she's on the trimming, right? So they heard that Raw Gwynland is going to take over that plant. Going to sort the Raw Gwynland. Right? Just imagine if Raw Gwynland now comes down with factory trawlers and processing crab at sea. Where's the harvest going to go? Where's the plant workers going to go? Who's going to feed them, eh?
Yeah.
Man, you haven't seen none of it yet. You've seen the demonstration, but as far as I'm concerned, down the road, buddy, this province is going to be in trouble.
It can go badly. There's potential there. And I guess, but if the harvesters seemingly, to a man, to a woman, wanted these things to happen, then if it doesn't work, then I guess we might have taken 2 steps backwards. But I really don't, I'm not in a position to prejudge how the season's going to look. I guess when it all comes and goes, whether we talk lobster, crab, or cod, or turbot, or halibut, or capelin, when we find out, a bit more information, we can make a better determination of exactly where we are and why we're there.
Raw Gwynland is one of the biggest companies in the world, eh?
They are a large company in the fish business, no question.
Like you said, he's going to take over everything.
Well, those types of purchases also have to be approved, and at the same time, the harvesters or the protesters were saying, and the government has committed to a review of foreign ownership, and rightfully so. It's the same conversation we had when Royal Greenland took over Quincy's operations. The same concerns were voiced, whether it be by the late Reg Anstey and or the minister responsible, and people in the business themselves. So yes, if that type of purchase is potential, that needs very careful consideration. I think lines right up with what the government says they need to do, is review it.
You take the planting Bonavista now, processing crab. If they lose that down there, buddy, I'm going to tell you, they're fine people, one of the best in Newfoundland, but you get up against them, buddy, and you're in big trouble. You haven't seen no protest yet, but I'm going to guarantee you down the road you is going to see a protest. Paddy, this home care, Paddy?
Yep.
We got home care, right?
We do.
The wife is in bed when she got a lift. We had to pay $600 a month. It went from $325 to $593. Shouldn't the government be subsidizing that?
The government, there's a review of it ongoing, and it's a legitimate issue because the whole country is talking about similar issues, right? Yeah. Is whether or not aging in place with the appropriate supports is better for seniors and more cost-effective for governments. And I think the review there is going to conclude absolutely it is. I mean, a week or a night in a long-term care facility versus the appropriate level of home support, I bet you we're paying more in long-term care than we would be in your own home. And you're happier, you're healthier, you're closer to your family and your buddies and familiar surroundings. So there's something to it. I'll give you the final word, Otto, before they make me go to the break.
Ukraine. I haven't got nothing against Ukraine, but I heard yesterday that you got a nurse on staff looking after the ones in the hotel, Is that true? Is Newfoundland paying that, or Ukraine got their own nurses?
Well, the fact is, I've asked the minister absolutely directly about how many Ukrainians are still in hotels, and he says none. And then someone will say, well, I know they are. Well, I can only ask the questions, and if there's an honest answer coming or a dishonest answer, I'll leave that up to others. But the short answer is the support's in place if they're in a hotel, whether that be with the presence of a nurse or covering the hotel bill or the food. In large part, that's covered by the provincial government. Now, plenty of Ukrainians are already up on their own 2 feet and working for a living. You know, I know someone who hired 3 Ukrainians and top quality employees, and they've all moved away from government support. They're paying their own bills. They got their own place. So, you know, if there's still some serious bills being paid by the government, it'd be nice to see the numbers, actual invoices submitted by whether it be the Holiday Inn or anywhere else in the province.
Paddy, in skiing yet, Paddy?
Pardon me?
Have you been in skiing?
No.
What a beautiful day, Paddy. And the weekend now is going to be real heavy rain,
Yeah, apparently so. Say goodbye to the snowbanks, which is not a bad thing at this point.
Well, Paddy, you ever comes this way, my son, drop in.
I will so. Thanks a lot, Otto.
Buddy. Leanne, too. If she come with the Walmart, drop in.
I appreciate the invite, Otto. Thanks for the call.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, final break of the morning. Christine, you are next to talk about healthcare up in Labrador and the story out there about Peter Panashway. Interesting. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3. Christine, you're on the air.
Hi, Patty. I just want to quickly talk about the healthcare system in Happy Valley. I know our healthcare system has gone everywhere, but it's sad when you go to Emerge. Somebody that's on doing treatment, very strong treatment. I was so sick, went down there, and not even a room to put me in there. And the hallway and the waiting room was full. And as people know, your immune system goes down crazy when you're on chemo. And I had to stay out there and wait until they get a room ready to get me in out of the crowd. What's going on with the world? What's wrong with our government? I don't understand it. They should have certain rules kept for sick people that, are going through this stuff. They're using a day surgery for overflow, putting patients in there.
And we just spoke with a lady not long ago, spending a number of days on a gurney in the corridor in St. Clair's and St. John's. So the problems are pretty extensive, no doubt.
Oh, like I said, it's ridiculous. I don't know. I told my doctor I'm not going down to Emerge no more unless I go to that one, because go down there and pick up something. I'm sick enough. Never mind picking up some kind of infection or something on top of everything that I'm going through. I'm not going to have it.
Okay.
And I wanted to say about Peter Panashway as well. Hats off to him. The sad thing is, it's too bad he had to take it in his own hands to do what he had to do and be arrested and now charged. Like there's something seriously going on with our RCMP here in Goose Bay. It's unbelievable.
Let me just tell people what we're talking about here. So the story is Mr. Panashway bought a house for his son Ben and their family to live in. They were in there. Ben has an issue with addiction, so he's moved away. The issue is that there's this fellow, Jeremy Andrew, I think is his name. The story is that Ben signed over the house of this guy who Peter Panashway alleges is a drug dealer, but he denies it. But basically what Mr. Panashway said is the RCMP aren't doing enough about drugs, especially cocaine and other communities. And he said, I'm going over there and I'm going to face this guy. He did. He vowed to beat the windows out of the car out front. He did. And lo and behold, the police were there in 5 minutes to arrest Mr. Panashway and making the exact point he was making. They're going to be quick to get him, but not quick to stop the flow of cocaine. That's basically what happened here. So then they go on to say that the band council is in control of who's actually homeowners, and the home is still recognized as being owned by Ben Panashway, not the other fellow who currently lives there. So it's a tricky story. And Mr. Panashway, I guess, he was at the end of his rope. He did what he did.
Oh, yeah, enough. And like the RCMP is steady saying, there's not enough evidence. I went through this a year ago. I was on your show. I done interviews with CBC. I was picking up crack in my backyard and in my driveway. People were dropping off my son because he was an addict. And I used to take that down to the RCMP station. Every time I picked it up, that's where I'd bring it. They never even so much even took a statement from me every time I'd bring it down. And so I know the drugs is everywhere. But in small communities like this is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It's unacceptable that our RCMP officers are doing absolutely nothing. And I just got to say, I'd like to see the government or whoever got the authority to have every RCMP officer randomly drug tested. That's what I'd like to see happen.
Yeah, I don't know what sort of frequency of drug testing there is in place. But, Christina, I hope you're doing okay, and we're going to follow the Mr. Panashway story, and I appreciate the call. Thanks for this.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Let's see if we get another quickie in before we run out of time. Line number 1. Ron, you're on the air.
Yeah, Paddy.
Yes, sir.
Yes, boy. Wanted to pick your brain about the herd or no?
Quickly, we're running out of time. Go ahead.
Okay. The team coming in Deer Lake.
Yep.
Do you know how many players they can pick up?
That would have been negotiated at the senior meetings. Yeah. And the last time I was involved, we were allowed to pick up 4.
Yeah. I was bantering with some of the boys last night. It seems like 5 this year.
Could be. So and 5 would include a goaltender.
And the Caps could pick up 1 goalie, I think, but the Deer Lake team 5 players. But and another thing we were wondering about too, I don't know if you know this or not, just throwing it out for the general public too, is can they only pick teams from the west side?
Yes, they can only pick from inside their own league. That was always the rule. Now, I think it gets a bit further complicated with the Southern Shore going to the Allen Cup. I don't know how many they picked up, because if they got out in front of this and picked up players, of course, they would have picked the very best to go to the national championship.
Yeah, I was trying to find this stuff online. Trying to look at stuff, and I'm not on Facebook or anything like that, but I'm trying to hard to figure out what's going on here, like on the thing. Right?
I can get that info. I know people with both teams, so I can get those numbers for you very quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Patty, that's about it for me. You had some great topics this morning, as usual, and thanks for keeping up the great work there.
I appreciate the call, Ron. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Patty, thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, I can get those numbers, no problem. All right, good show today. Big thanks to all hands who support the program, and we will indeed pick up this conversation again tomorrow morning right here on VOCM and Big Land FM's Open Line. On behalf of the producer, Fonz King, I'm your host, Paddy Daly. Have yourself a safe, fun, happy day. We'll talk in the morning. Bye-bye.